Yeah, my microphone just started working, but it wasn't captured. Okay, so we'll get started at 5 o'clock. So we're gonna need external hard drive today, and Callie, we're gonna do a little bit of monitoring today. But in this unit, we're gonna talk about different type of monitoring tools, from network into your hosts and endpoints, and then looking at applications. And so I want to introduce you to some of the resources that's available for the industry, and then we'll take a look at Windows hosts along with Linux hosts, some of the basic tools that we need to know, and then you can also explore other tools. So when you do analysis, you first need to gather data, and in order to do effective analysis, you need to correlate your data. Many of the tools that we have seen, like statics or EOK or some of the log search type of mechanism, is working well with network and systems, right? But we want to ultimately capture network related events, and that could be incidents or it could be anomalies. Sometimes it doesn't have to be incidents. It could just be something that is abnormal and you need to evaluate it. Okay. So you need to look at how your traffic is routed. The best thing that you can examine this is through the actual appliances that are at the edge of your network.
So one deleted the 41A from this.
You can give that to me. Yeah, thank you. And then you can also use security appliance or boundary-based system, right? So routed traffic is going to be logged, and we can use technology like NetFlow, S-Flow, J-Flow, and there are variations of the application that you can examine your routed traffic. So running Wireshark and Network Sniffer is not enough, right? Because when you're examining the border appliances, they are not Windows or Linux based. They are network systems. So you would have to use an application that's able to access these devices' logs. And when you're looking at the first 4 layers of the network stack, it's also going to examine the type of data that's being passed in those layers, or when it goes from the physical connection all the way to routing and also transport. So in the first few questions, we need to describe the 3 basic methods of monitoring. You need to have router-based monitoring. Can you see that? Do you need it more enlarged? Let me enlarge it a little bit more, okay? Sorry. So better. So router-based monitoring, this is used to detect network compromises at the border. So as the attack is coming in from an external network, it's going to be inbound coming into your router or your gateway firewall, right? Or some kind of filtering system or security appliance that you have at the border. Normally we would see firewall there. Could be packet filtering or, different types of firewall. But the router is going to give you more information, and as it brings that traffic into the internal network, you also have other switches and routers at work, right? Like a layer 4 switch. That's going to route it to different segment of your network. Let's say that we are segmenting our network inside using, virtual LAN or even different IP addresses, and setting route for our internal network. This is going to help you detect any kind of compromises. So traffic that could be malicious to your network. That's useful. So router-based monitoring is one of the areas that we first look at when you need to determine potential compromise for your network. You also need to have active monitoring. This is a way that we can collect data on the availability, the routes, packet latency or packet delay or loss, and bandwidth. So it really addresses your availability in the CIA when you're doing active monitoring. And this can be done with network sniffer and also the NetFlow or the JFlow or some of the other tools that we would use to look at routes. You can also look at routing tables and the logs for the routers manually. You don't have to use an application, but ideally recommended that we would streamline a lot of the manual process through an application. So if you have 100 routers or 1,000 routers, that would make it a lot more convenient comparing to directly connect via SSH to the router, pulling its logs, looking at its information. That could be very tedious and it takes a lot of time. We can perform a third type of monitoring, which is passive monitoring. And this is when you see the sniffer comes in. You can examine your network traffic that goes through a certain location on the network length and evaluate the rate. Are you going to have a adequate type of throughput or percentage? The type of protocol that you're using, right? And if you're looking at Wireshark as a sniffer, you can filter. You can also set it to examine a certain type of packet. And then we can also look at traffic content. Now, if the firewall passed that packet inside, likely that it's already been interrogated or examined. So the payload is going to tell us about the data that's inside that network traffic packet. And then sending and receiving packets. So the analysis from Wireshark also gives you, statistic, and you can use that and correlate that with other areas of your network. And that's going to tell you how your network is performing and potential threats coming into your network. Now, this seems ideal and a lot of it is theoretical, right? But the practice is that we should have active monitoring at all times. So if you want your availability to be 7 nines, 99.99999%, right? Then you should have these monitoring components for your network. So I would encourage you to examine some of the tools that's used, right? So as an analyst, you should be able to add those tools to your list or your resume. So the monitoring mechanism that's included with Hassler Router Traffic Grapher, this is just a tool. So it includes your network sniffer, which just be able to look at packets and protocol. It would also give you flows information that would just mean throughput. So your network performance and your packet flow. So it really determined the send and receive, right? Like if you're looking at things like when I ping someone from a Windows, if I send 4 packets, receive 4 packets, I have 100%. But it also look at the throughput rate. So, and based on your bandwidth. And then we have SNMP, which is your simple network management protocol. This allows us to look at the state of your network systems that are connected. We use this particular protocol to identify the systems that are connected and also query the state of that system or performance of that system. And you can implement scripts and things to make it more convenient if you are doing the administration part of this. Sometime in security, we might not necessarily have to automate a lot of things, but we can automate the analysis part of it is to remember that when you start auditing or analyzing something, you have to query all those systems because that's the inventory side, right? So SNMP is going to give you that. So here's the network layout. You would see that, right? In a network coming in from other networks that's considered the internet, you would have firewall, intrusion prevention system. You have the border router. This is the main router that has the public IP. And then we would send it to the segment router. So here you would have the division A and the division B. And these are going to be, so the reason why they did this was they want to isolate this part of the network from this part of the network. So, and when you do that, you just need to place a layer 4 switch or a router. And then you can place an appliance here. So basically on the rack, it is physically on the same rack, possibly, right? You can have separate racks. But logically, when we're connecting, we would connect these two routers to this one. And then this one connects out to your, so it has to filter through your IPS and your firewall. So this is your backbone area, these guys. And the IPS is then going to be connected to the firewall. The design of this network is imperfect in that you are going to have congestion. Filter here and filter here. But the bright side on that is when you have security this way, if they tackle the firewall, they still have to battle with the IPS before they can get routed in. So in order to do that, they have to spoof in several levels, right? In order to get to be routed within and get to the switch level. Okay, so they're going to come in with the spoof IP. And so when you collect that, you would see that, right, that you would identify the IP and the collector is going to give you that information. So all the data from these appliances is going to feed here. Okay, any question? Now, if I'm the attacker, once I get into here, I have to find this. Why? Because if I want to erase my track, this is going to contain all the logs of my track, my identity. Right? So if I evaded the IPS, once I get here, I need to make sure I delete my trace. So that way I can come across and not be detected, right? Okay. So it talks about this. You can also use Armon or NetFlow. I think Armon been around for a long time, since the 90s. So active monitoring, some example that you would see here, you can use iPerf or ping is a very common tool. Now, if they allow ping, then you'll be able to ping, but not all networks allow ping. So you won't be able to do that. Okay. Here's your PRTG information. So if you want to do passive monitoring capture, you can do a network tab. And the attacker can do the same thing, you know, on a physical tap, if they install a tap with where your central backbone is, they'll be able to eavesdrop on all the conversation. But the physical tap is a lot more difficult. Just imagine walking in with this appliance and then connecting the cable to it. Of course it's gonna ring, unless they impersonate an IT technician or, you know, some kind of support technician, they can tap. But it's a lot harder to attack physically that way versus, you can do it logically through software at many different levels. As long as you know the protocols and your packet information. Okay. So on the WMI, this is window management instrumentation. This is allowing you to also add script and application to be able to manage. You do see some of this with the former performance monitor used to be a separate component. Microsoft integrated it now into your basic OS. And then you are going to see some of that when you do the lab today. Okay. So WMI, this is a way that you can adapt to monitor your servers, your system's health. Because when you deal with denial of service attack, it plays on availability. And if you don't take care of that or maintain that, you will be susceptible to that kind of attack. Okay. So that would be the fourth mechanism that's part of the PRTG. Make sure that we remember what these are. It will come up on your final exam and quiz. So when you search online, there are many companies that are gonna give you the information about their best tool. But the ones that often preferred by many organizations, you're gonna hear SolarWinds, that's gonna come up a lot. If you go to IT security conference or even cloud, they're there. You would see their booth and their information. For network traffic analysis, you can also use Cacti. This can be incorporated as an API with Python. So if you're writing the script, you can add, right? You can integrate Cacti and also Nagios. And this list changed from year to year. So you would see that there will be someone else that's going to provide something better. But, widely, if we want to look at the majority of the companies or even corporate, you would see that some of these tools are going to come up. So my recommendation is to be familiar with these tools, to learn them, and to be an expert in them, because that's just going to give you the leverage in getting some of the areas right. I do introduce some of the tools to you in this class, but we can't, there will be thousands and thousands of tools. So a lot of it is you have to look at what's popular and try to learn it. Okay, any questions? So when you do network analysis, sometimes that you have to send out signal to network system to ask it for information. That's what we're doing, right? Through software or physically through a device. So when that happens, when you're beaconing for network analysis, you're submitting some kind of command or request. Like, tell me if you're connected. So the system would then respond with its status, right? That is active and alive. So when there's beaconing, it's simply submit the commands in the form of requests. But in that, it has to respond back, right? Who's asking, and the system would provide some kind of status. So for the attacker, that would be the opportunity to implant some kind of malicious application or file. So that way they can achieve their goal. A lot of the malware could be Trojan or it could be more malicious. So, or sometimes they can install backdoor. It really is based on the intention of the attack. So you have to know that when systems is beaconing, it calls back, right? Because you're always going to have source and destination. The only time that you're stealthy is when you're not sending requests. So when you're doing analysis, sometimes if you want to be known or shown, then you are considered beaconing, right? You are doing an active form of query or request. But when you are trying to be more passive, you might not get some of the information that you need to get. And I talk about this in my ethical hacking class. So you would, and the window of time that you have to be more passive or to be active might not be long, right? Sometime your agreement for maybe pen testing, they want you to be more stealth and you have to find as much information, as much security gap as possible. And that can be a challenge. So the detection system is gonna really find the beaconing. Okay. So in order to detect beaconing behavior, that's part of the intrusion detection system and the intrusion prevention system. Sometimes you would see companies refer to this as IDPS because it might be one appliance that it's detecting and prevent. And then sometimes they are separate appliances. But the way that we teach here is I want you to distinguish the difference between the two, right? IDS doesn't prevent, IPS does, but sometimes they are all in one device. So it is really the set rules that's going to be able to determine any kind of behavior that would be anomaly for that network, right? Like botnet controllers. So for a botnet, we know that it's going to come from a massive type of traffic from many different entities at once. Because when they control, they're going to click that button. It's going to pull all the bots and it's going to submit that one command. And normally botnet is used to deplete availability. So your bandwidth is going to draw a lot, right? So when we're monitoring the network, we should see that all the routers and all your security appliances, it's going to try to handle that. If it's not preventing it, you would then see the traffic coming through and it might be attacking one specific destination, right? So if you're looking at denial of service attack, so in that case, they're doing two things. If they're depleting your network bandwidth and they are depleting or they're targeting a specific server in your internal network, that server is going to be disrupted, but then your bandwidth is going to be drawn, right? And so if you don't handle quality of services and divert your traffic, then you are going to suffer. Okay, so everything slows down, basically. That's the first sign. Okay, so Cacti, Nagios, SolarWinds information, I give you the basic. You can find generally the same thing, but Nagios uses Perl and it is executable through the application. This is open source, and it uses SNMP polling. Okay, so bandwidth consumption, I talked about that for business disruption, also for beaconing. And this is a Wireshark screenshot. So make sure that we are just not running the application for fun. We want to make sure we inspect outbound. Because remember, beacon, it needs to have response. So if you can't track it when it's coming in, you should be able to track it when it's leaving. Right? So here's the unexpected traffic. You might have scans or probes. irregular peer-to-peer. So if they install malware on a laptop of a user because the user clicked on it, the system might connect directly to that system. So you might see peer-to-peer traffic. And then you also see network traffic spike. So the type of traffic that's considered unexpected traffic would be scan probes, irregular peer-to-peer traffic between the systems that aren't expecting any kind of communication, a spike in network traffic. So you have heightened network traffic like heavy congestion, or more directed attack traffic. So if I have directed attack, that just means that I'm seeing that one focus on that one specific system, right? Like I mentioned before, let's say that if you have botnet attacking that one destination, it is a directed attack. Now they're clever with how they're doing distributed denial of service. They might divide up the traffic in groups, but your system, if it has specific rules, so anytime that I'm getting, more than, let's say 50 requests or 20 requests from one source, then it should block it, right? We can slow it down and block it, and then, looking at how effective the rule is, and then be able to change that. So the second part of the question asks you describe the methods that are used to detect unexpected traffic on the network. So what would you do? You can set anomaly based. So here is my normal baseline, right? Like my traffic flow is like this. Anything outside of that is irregular. That's anomaly based. So in order to do anomaly based, you have to give it what normal is. What is the baseline for your network, right? So if your network has a specific percentage in flow and these are the activity. So in order to achieve anomaly based, you have to have historical data. And then we can have heuristic and behavior, right? We can set based on how your system responds or activities based. So heuristic and behavior is really how the system is communicating back and forth. So we can say that, if it behaves this way, then block it. And then we can set. So for packet based, you would see a lot of like protocol analysis based. So if you're looking at like packet firewall, packet filtering firewall, or packet based type of security appliance, it's going to examine this. But the behavior and the anomaly based, a lot of this, you got to give it what is considered a regular behavior, right? So both of these require data. And then for the protocol analysis, we normally include the protocol that we use and anything outside of that block. So this is going to help you detect unexpected traffic that is not in your normal operation. Any questions? So how can we detect things that are probed or scans that are used? Or scanner that's used to obtain scans, I should say. So in order to detect scan, we scan. It sounds weird, but it is. Because if you see, I know most of you have taken 27, right? Possibly other classes. Nmap, ZenMap, vulnerability scanners, those sends probes, right? Those are active scanners. So in order for it to get results from scan, it needs to submit packets to the target, right? So with that, if we have network scanner working, we should pick that up. So we would scan to detect scan because we would see, right, a group of packets that are being submitted to that target, and that target would respond. That's how they would be able to find our port information, our services that are running, our OSs, because those type of scanner pick up mostly, right, based on connection, communication, and possibly response that contains some information like banners. So when you're using scan, it runs tests for ports. So we would scan to detect scanners that are being used. You can examine IP addresses in the network that would be maybe targeted. So when you use something like Wireshark as scanner, you would then be able to check, right? Could be a range of IP. They might be attacking a segment of your network or a specific system. Usually, it might be one targeted system. So if you have repeated requests for the services that are not active, then that might be a scan. So that's how you can tell. Are we okay with this? Any questions? So earlier I mentioned about the baseline protocol analyzers. Scan and probe information is here. Just to also point out that if they're running stealthy scan, you might not see a lot of requests coming through. Those are harder to detect. And often they're ran on remote systems or targeting remote systems. Now, your current intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system, or even the firewall, they do have capability to detect scanners, right? That's a feature that's built into a lot of these security appliances. But we want to make sure that that feature is enabled, and then you adapt that to your environment. That means that you have to customize the rules that are set. Turning it on simply it's not effective, right? Until you configure it. Okay. So I gave you an example for this already. But denial of service ultimately is a way to exhaust a certain target. And distributed denial of service would then also do the same thing. So this is the second part. I just mentioned that. So it would overwhelm the system by submitting a lot of requests to that particular system, and that system would get so busy to respond that it would be disrupted. So to effectively block distributed denial of service or denial of service attack is to use security appliance. We mentioned before, if you're doing packet filtering firewall, you can have it examine the packets. We can set the number of packets. So if we're getting, more than a certain number of packets, like 20 packets, 50 packets, 100 packets, that would be the base, right? The maximum packets can be passed from a certain system. And then on the inside, so if you have the border firewall, that firewall is filtering, it's checking. Let's say I'm using filtering firewall there. And if it passes through, your intrusion prevention system is following that, right? Could be before, after router. You can then examine again. So they need to be able to bypass multiple level of security appliances before entering your internal network. Some organization, they use multiple firewall. So for example, if I had configured a firewall, you know, a certain type of firewall at the border, and then behind the router, they have another security appliance or another firewall. So it checks. And then you would have, and then it will branch out to the DMZ. And then for the inside, you would then, on the inside, you can do network detection, network intrusion detection system, or an internal firewall. So using the firewall and intrusion prevention system would allow you to block traffic. You can set it from a certain source, right? Like, because normally they would then need to spoof IP coming into the network. And if they need to get deep inside your internal network, they would have then to put spoof MAC in order, or overwhelm the ARP table in order to get to that segment. So what that means is you need to make sure that your firewall rule is up to date with. So when you block, you have to continue to block, and they can get creative about spoofing IP, right? If you're blocking this IP, I'll just use another IP. So instead of blocking, we have to really consider what would be allowable traffic, right? Whitelisting compared to blacklisting, because it would then be more effective. Because when you're blocking, you have to customize your rules all the time. Okay, so you can also control it by payload. So we can say, because attack normally require larger payload, so we can specify payload size, right? In bytes or megabytes, gigabytes, whatever, right? You can set that. Okay. So to really detect it, we would look at your network monitoring tools, your IPS, IDS rules analysis. So looking at, so not just to set the rules, but to see how effective they are. And then command line tool for server traffic analysis. So server it tracks everything, right? It keeps logs of what's communicated, what's served, what's responded, what's requested. So all of those things are tracked. So we have to do the traffic to it and how it responds to the request. Any question? So denial of service is still live and strong. We know that. There are many ways to approach it now, right? If you stop it one way, there will be another way. So this is kind of important to look at. It says, distributed denial of service mitigation system distributes copies of website content globally to the CDN servers, while blocking the DOS attack using centrally managed defense mechanism. This would allow the user to continue using your service. So if you're running something like Amazon, right, at their data center, you betcha they're gonna have implementation that so that way their servers don't go down. They have many of it, right? So if you have millions and millions of users using it, so the same thing for social media. You just don't have a few systems, you have thousands of them. And then you would use referral to be able to pull them in. You can also set up proxy and other things. So security mechanism can be endless. It's also coming back to how you want to design it, what kind of resource you have, the maintenance side of it, right? Okay, detection information is here. In this week, my ethical hacking class, they're gonna go over rogue wireless and then wireless attack. But rogue devices happens all the time. Sometimes people are not allowed to bring in home computer. I've had faculty here tells me that they bring in their tower from home and they plug it into the network, which should not be a good practice. You don't allow that because all your systems should be managed and controlled and purchased by the company. So that way you can keep inventory and maintenance of it. If they plug it into the network and it's still working and it's obtaining IP address, someone is not doing their job. Okay. So we can do this by MAC filter. On the network, you should, this is why inventory is important. When you buy a system, you install the OS on it, you obtain the information. So when your inventory list should have system name, right? The location, the physical location of that system, its MAC address, IP will change over time, is associated with that system. For security, that's important because we can MAC filter from that segment level in the switch. So in the switch, right, if I take a system from home and plug it in, it doesn't have that MAC address for that company, then I'm not able to use it. Okay. So that's really important. I think sometimes we overlook that. So a rogue device can be detected through MAC validation, media access controller address validation from the network inventory. So your SNMP, if it's implemented, what it does is it's querying all the systems that are connected. If you're running something like Nessus vulnerability assessment application, which it queries all the system and it's checking MAC IP updates, all of those things. But ultimately, we want to validate. So we would have a list of allowable MAC addresses. It's like entering a country, right? You have to have passport or visa. So that means that you are allowed to enter. So that list of MAC address would be what's allowed for that network. And we can, you know, if you detect that there's an irregular MAC address, all MAC address is the beginning group of identifier is registered to a vendor. You can find it through the website. If you took CIS40A with me, you've seen this before. So you can find it with the vendor. They might contract it out to some company in China, but it's registered to them, so it's legitimate. Why do we care about that? Because MAC address is spoof? It could be, right? So an attacker would spoof the MAC address. A lot of times they would spoof a legitimate system MAC address, so that way they can be connected. That's the goal. So how do I know if something is spoofed? Well, if there's a system and there's a copy of that system, then it's spoofed. Okay. And you can use something like Nmap to look at what ports are used. And Nmap is useful for vulnerability assessment on the network, that it tells you, you know, the ports are open, ports are closed, which tells you what kind of service they're using. Site surveys, we know what that is, right? What's site survey? What is site survey? Should learn this from like CS25, because I sat in a class to observe the faculty yesterday and he went over that when he went over networking. And I talk about this in 40A. What is site survey? So when you're looking at a job, it says, you know, network security technician needed. Must be able to implement troubleshoot LAN and implement security solution for LAN and perform site survey. What does site survey mean?
That's sense.
Kind of like an audit on this, right, like making.
Yeah,
So
go
if it's
see and look what that is, right? So if I do a site survey for MVC network, what do? I walk down and look at the network and looking at how things are connected. So if you're doing a site survey for wireless, what are you checking for? How access points are connected, the signals that it's sending, what the wireless devices that are connected. But a lot of the times when we're doing site survey for wireless, we're checking for signal for wireless, right? Access point that's being mounted, their power, their performance, and so on. So when you're doing site survey, you actually looking at that physical sites. It could be the entire network, could be a segment of the network, right? And in a larger enterprise level, you would have locations. So if we're looking at Southern California for something like Bank of America, you got different location, and in each location they have a network, and then that network is connected with the larger network, right? Okay, so really examining it, but just to evaluate it from a standpoint of connectivity, not just logically, but physically. Okay, so when your host is compromised, and the host could be a system like your desktop, your laptop, but those could be endpoints, but your host could also be your servers, right? It could be a terminal, it could be a sales terminal, it could be a warehouse terminal, a system that's connected in a larger network. If it is compromised, we can do analysis on CPU and memory analysis. If there are indicators for memory leak, then likely, potentially, you might have something that is jeopardizing it. Sometimes it could also be malware. Storage capacity. Now, depending on the system admin on this, when I used to be an admin, I actually have like, I set notification for when storage reached a certain capacity, so that way I don't have to go check individual systems. And you can do that through OSs or through the network itself. And then file system change and anomaly. So my question for you is, how can you tell if file system has been changed?
Logs.
Logs, what else? There's several ways in security. I'm sure we talked about it all the time. So file system is really used by OSs, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a file, but it could be system file. Like in Windows, it would be NTFS. So when you change an actual system file system, a lot of the times you wipe the data. But let's say that if we're looking at the content within the OS, they might not modify the entire thing, but they might modify some system files. How can you tell? In Windows, you can tell by
Hashes.
good. That's a good start. So hash ID, where else? So in Windows, regedit rings a bell. What is that? Command for registry. Anytime that things are changed in a system, registry in Windows, registry track it. Right? Whether you install hardware, you install software, you modify things. You can also do audit in Windows OSs, where there's auditing mechanism for lots of things. Permissions, privilege, things that are modified, right? So when you do this, you really looking at the audit side of the house. You understand? Yes.
Sorry for the confusion. Isn't like the registry the same? It's kind of like the same thing as logs. Or...
No. Your system logs. So let's just take Windows for, because Linux is this log, right? Windows, for example. When you're doing Windows, logs goes into event. Event viewer is where you see the logs or your system logs. But registry, it uses keys. So anytime that things get modified, like you install an application, it changes the nature of that system, the state of that system. So in order to initiate that change at the low level, it uses registry.
Oh,
So it updates like your H key. Those are the sub data pieces of the database. So registry is a database that contains system information. But with that, when you modify it, it changes the H key, right? So in forensic, when we say things, if things get deleted and modified, you can find that in registry.
okay. So
Yeah.
logs are event-based and registry.
Yeah.
is-
That's correct. A lot of, so the logs is, we would look at logs, things that already occurred, right? But registry also indicated like the state or the changes in the system. Okay, so the tools that you can use in Windows OS for analysis is Performance Monitor or ResMon. I think some of this is general, but because there's network performance monitor on the server for Windows OS. Perfmon, let's say that if I search Perfmon, I'm sorry, I will put that back. So when you can search for performance monitor here, if you open up the app, it's equipped with your, if you ever use your task manager and you're looking at your CPU and memory performance level, that's part of performance monitor as well, right? It's giving you a summary of how your system state or health of your system would be. So you can use ResMon and Perfmon. In Linux, you're going to use some of the commands today is ps, top, df, w commands. There are more. Top is very common. It's kind of like looking at performance monitor in Linux. And then PS, you're going to see that today. And Microsoft, sometimes they retire tools too. They would replace it with something else and then they would modify it. Depends on their OS design and then, you know, how useful it is. So if they find that it's, you know, the integration of that it's too tedious and then they want to modify it in their design, then sometimes you see that a tool will go away. So when you are managing Linux servers, you need to know some of the basic command because most Linux server doesn't have desktop. Right? Like for example, if you're managing web servers that are running Linux in the back, it depends. It could be, you know, Arch, it could be Debian, it could be. So the variation in that we just need to know. But a lot of these commands are shared across different releases of Linux. So if you have software or malware that is installed on the system, you can manage some of the what is allowed and what's not allowed, right? Normally, sometimes we would have application server that would allow, we would include all the applications that we permit. And then you can control that with privilege, right, for the user. And in Microsoft environment, that's your user rights assignment for whether they can install, they can. And then you can also control it through the server on what kind of application they can download and use, or, you know, and that would tie to their user account and group membership. But you can use something that would be centralized. So that way you can manage it from an area, such as Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, This allows you to control what software can be installed. So for example, you provide all your users with laptop, right? They would take it home and remotely work maybe most of the time. So you have to have a way to centralize that to see, you know, what application that they would be using. We would install that on the system already before they check it out. But if you allow the user to install additional application on their laptop for work purposes, then you would need to manage it. Yeah, I don't advise allowing the user to do that, right? We should have more of the technical control element in allowing the user, because then they would install malware and other things. But in the case that you worry about that, you should have security software running, right? Host-based firewall, antivirus. OS itself has it, but you want to have licensed antivirus type of application. Any question? So let's move this down a little. There's more to the list, sorry. But you can summarize this, you don't have to be verbose. So you can also blacklist file, right, or software. That means that we're gonna block all of those software. So if you allow the user to install certain type of software, then you should control what software is allowed. So if they're trying to install software that's not allowed, then they will get an error warning. And that's different from using antivirus or anti-malware, because your list would contain prohibited files or malicious files, right? Because the antivirus only contain malicious files that could be harmful to the system. If you're doing a white application listing, that's an allowed list. It would give you, or it would use that list to permit the user installation of that those applications. So I put a note there. It says, in a fully whitelisted environment, no files that are not previously permitted are allowed on the system. So it has been blacklisted. It will not be able to make it to the whitelist, the whitelisting of the application. Okay. That is just to avoid system conflict or system determination conflict. Okay, because, and it eliminates some of the error, because if you transfer from one list to the other, potentially there's duplicate of it, and then, you know, is it allowed or disallowed, right? And then in your operating system, we need to determine what would be normal and what would be abnormal. So we need to identify what abnormal means. So you can use something like system internals. This was really popular back in the day. It still is, I guess. You have access, CHK. You can do permission audit and privilege audit. You can implement audit policy in Windows environment through Group Policy Editor. So permission audit means that we look at what has been changed to the permission. Because remember, malware and attackers, those threats tend to do what? Change privilege and permissions to the things that are needed for access. So when we do an audit change, an audit policy, we setting up the rules on how it would check for what has been changed in permission. So when I say permissions, that would be pertaining to objects or files or drives, right? So for example, if I'm looking at critical data, bless you. So if an entity, a user has gone from a regular user account access level permission, right? So let's say read write only, or even read only, and then had gone to full control, audit policy should track that, right? It would tell you that these are the users in group that has been modified. Here is when. And when you modify something, going back to what Brandon was asking earlier, when you modify something, it has a log of it. So when we're doing an audit, simply we're going back to the records of what has been changed. So it's going to pull that information from that event that occurred from the logs, and it's going to report that to you. So and so account was changed. This file permission was changed, right? And then if we're doing privilege change, it would say so and so, right? User rights or privilege has been changed. But remember that auditing is after the fact, isn't it? So it's good to go back and look at what has been modified for improvement. And in most cases, when we're doing an incident response, we are going to have to go back and audit because something had failed for us to have an incident. So here, this is where I talked about earlier. How can we prevent and monitor registry key changes in Windows OS? So we know that when I add hardware to the system, it changes the registry. When I add software, it changes the registry. If you have application whitelisting, if you update your operating system, and if you use agent-based tools and control false positive detection, you would be able to prevent and monitor what has been changed to your registry. Because as you run updates, it look at what is in your registry, right? And updates changes the registry function. So when I say whitelisting application, we only allow certain type of application to be used. And I feel so bad for you guys who are trying to look at the bottom because you're working ahead. So in order to check status for your service in Linux, it's pretty straightforward, right? Service space dash dash, there's a double dash, that's your option, status dash all. So where do I check for Windows? How do I check my services for Windows system? Guys, we live on the services. Cybersecurity is about service, right? How do you know what services? So even availability, you can tell what services failed, right? Or successful. On server system, it will tell you what's failed, right? On Windows Server, you should know these answers because they will ask you that for interviews and things. So in Windows system, right, when you boot up Windows Server, it's going to give you the status of what is running, like DNS, the roles, right? What's failed, what's connected. But in your client system, simply search services. Isn't that where it is? So this is called a services console. So in your computer management console, you can add any other console to it, right? I think I've told you before if you've taken my class. So if you're using computer management console here, you can add in your toolbox. So it's gonna give you this, right? There's your performance, there's your event viewer. Those are your system tools. And then your services and application goes here. So all you need for Windows client system to manage this is your computer management console. You can access the sub console individually. So your WMI, remember what I said earlier? So here it's not configured, but you can set it for configuration. Yeah. There you go. Okay. Must remember. Okay, for 17, the analysis that should be performed to detect application attack. Right? We would need to look at application services. We know exactly what that is in Windows client system now. So if you're running some kind of app, right, that services is going to say running. If I'm running web application, it should have web and other things. If if that web application is secured, it also have encryption, other things. So an application would have many different types of services that would allow it to run, right? It would use all of those things to work. You can also have errors. So where do I go to find the errors? We are going to be analysts after all. Where are we going to find errors? In Windows, where would I find that? Yes, in your logs, that's correct. In Event Viewer for Windows, right? If you go into Event Viewer, it gives you the subcategories, security, application, all of those things. Behavior, malware infections, account access, memory usage, and anytime that it's account access, we can go back to audit. We can all go back to logs. So when you log in, it actually tracked that already, right? And then also if they're logged into the network, then you can go back to the server. So there are many things that you can see. Memory usage, we just need to go back to performance monitor or system monitor. Okay, so from here on, I suggest that when we go through these questions, you have to ask yourself, where can I go and do this? Okay, if we haven't learned it, explore it. If you don't remember it, go back and review it. Because a few classes from now, you're going to be finishing the certificate and you want to go to work. And many of my students said, well, I got a security certificate. I took all the upper classes, but why am I getting help desk job, right? Possibly because that might be the job that opens, but you really have to stand up to the knowledge level for this if you want to go for this. Okay, if you put that, if you add things like I'm able to analyze systems and things like that, they're gonna ask you questions. Where do you go to find data to do analysis? You should know at least where to navigate to. All right, let's stop recording.